and led to the ousting of Navy Secretary Richard Spencer. The president tweeting that he will, quote, always protect our great war fighters. But Spencer, who was fired over the weekend, had some very harsh words for the commander-in-chief while speaking to CBS last night.
I don't think he really understands the full definition of a warfighter. A warfighter is a profession of arms, and a profession of arms has standards that they have to be held to, and they hold themselves to.
Joining me now to discuss, Ambassador Chris Hill. He has held posts all over the world and is an NBC diplomacy expert, and Admiral James Stavridis, former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, author of The Accidental Admiral. He just wrote a new piece specifically about this, the firing of Spencer. So, Admiral, I must go to you first. In your latest piece, you argue that President Trump should trust the SEALs to judge themselves. Explain the lasting impact of what all of this could have.
Sure. The salient fact here, and it's not just this one SEAL chief petty officer, it's actually three, two Army, the one Navy, where President Trump has reached in and overridden the military justice system. And I think that's where the mistake is here, because what we ought to be doing, because only those who have been in combat can understand the kind of crucible of combat that someone like Eddie Gallagher has gone through. We ought to respect that. Let his peers make those judgments about whether he ought to retain that SEAL pin and stay in the SEAL community. The heart of this is trusting your warfighters, as Secretary Spencer said, to be professionals. The president has said, hey, we train them to be killing machines, then we go after them when they kill somebody. That's not correct. We train them not to be killing machines, but to be thinking machines who can be lethal when they must, but understand those rules and standards as professionals throughout their operations.
Admiral, two former Navy secretaries under President Bush and President Clinton are out with an op-ed, and they write, the president's values are not those of our military. It will do grievous damage to our armed forces if they become so. That says something.
They are correct, and I know both of them. I was Chief of Staff to Secretary of the Navy Richard Danzig when I was a captain, and as a younger officer, I was Special Assistant to Secretary of the Navy Sean O'Keefe. I know this office. I know the importance of it, and they are correct in their assessment. And, Stephanie, what will happen here is that young rank-and-file SEALs, Green Berets, all of our military will see this and wonder, gosh, if I see something wrong, should I bring it forward or not? And that would be very corrosive over time. That would decrement the professionalism of the military.
Then explain this. Eddie Gallagher went on Fox News, said the military stands with the president. If you look at polling, the president does have a lot of support from the military. How do you square that with two people as senior as they are and you speaking against the president's values?
In terms of why the president enjoys support, a lot of his policy positions are ones that are attractive to those in the military, starting with a big defense budget. Secondly, he shows a lot of respect to the military, and therefore he does poll somewhat better with the military than it does with the American public at large. I wouldn't overstate that. And let's face it, that kind of broad question of whether he's liked or not as a commander-in-chief is important to him politically. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about whether or not we ought to pardon those who've been convicted of war criminal behavior. And here's the last important point, Stephanie. All of these cases were brought forward not by the political correctness police. They were brought forward by fellow SEALs, by fellow Green Berets who testified against them. This is a peer process. That's where it should rest.
Ambassador, Daily Beast is reporting that the president now wants 3 convicted or accused war criminals to campaign for him in 2020. What kind of message would that send?
Well, it's obviously appalling. I mean, the United States has kind of led the effort to make it clear to countries that we will not be indifferent about war criminals. We will go after war criminals. I spent a lot of time on the Bosnian conflict, later in Kosovo. We went after war criminals. And one of the reasons that we are able to do this is we've had the high road of a military justice system that is the best in the world. And now we have a president who has politicized or sought to politicize every institution of our country, including the courts, as we just heard this morning, but also the military. And this is horrific, frankly, to our overall status as the world's greatest democracy. This president understands nothing, and I think it is time for some of his supporters, whether they're Lindsey Graham or others, really to take a stand on this, because there seems to be no end to the sort of lawlessness that this president conducts himself.
I want to switch gears for 1 second. Ambassador, New York Times reporting that the U.S. has resumed large-scale operations against ISIS in northern Syria. What is your reaction to this?
My reaction is, look, this is something, this is not the kind of war where you win it one day and have a victory parade the next day. This is going to be a slog, and I am not one of those who believes we should be in forever wars or be there for decades, but the notion that we can precipitously withdraw and abandon allies in the field and expect it all to be over is simply a profound misunderstanding of what we're dealing with. So I'm not at all surprised that we're doing this, but if we're going to be successful, we have to work with partners and allies, and I think we need to continue that very special relationship that we've had with the Kurds, who are, after all, the warfighters, the primary warfighters in this fight with this, frankly, civilizational foe in ISIS.
Admiral?
Last thought, agreeing entirely with my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Chris Hill. Let's look at the scale here. In these, quote, forever wars, we had 150,000 troops in Afghanistan when I commanded that mission as NATO commander. We had 175,000 troops in Iraq. This is not that. We've already withdrawn 95% of the troops. This is 2,000 troops in Syria, a few thousand troops in Iraq, a handful of troops scattered around the region, 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. It's a relatively small investment that will pay big dividends. Big doors swing on small hinges. This is a very, very sensible deployment. And you understand leverage, right? This is leverage in a military context, Stephanie. It makes sense. I'm glad we are back in.
Leverage. You are speaking my language. Admiral, Ambassador, thank you both so much.